The moment the lawyer slid that rusted key across the table, I knew something was wrong. My brother Mateo had just inherited the entire house. The house I helped pay to maintain. The house I spent weekends fixing while he handled paperwork. So why did I get this corroded key with a strange symbol carved into it, and a quiet smile from Mr. Whitmore that didn't match the room? "My father left me this," I asked by trying to keep my voice steady. Whitmore didn't answer directly. He just said, "Your father believed you'd know what to do." But here's what didn't make sense if Mateo got everything. Why was he already rushing to sell the house before the week was over, and why did it feel like I was the only one who wasn't supposed to understand what was really going on? If you're watching this from outside the US, tell me where you're from. And what time is it there right now? I read every comment, and if you've ever felt like your own family was hiding something from you, you might want to stay for this. I didn't go home after the lawyer's office. Instead, I sat in my car across the street from the house I grew up in, watching the porch light flicker on as the sun dropped behind the trees. Mateo had already gone inside. Of course he had. He always moved fast when there was something to gain. The place looked the same from the outside, white siding chipped near the corners, the same uneven steps my father refused to fix because he said they built character. But something about it felt different now. Like I wasn't supposed to belong there anymore. I stared at the key in my palm. Rusted, heavy, old. Not decorative, not symbolic. Real. Used. And definitely not random. I waited until Mateo's car engine went silent and the lights inside settled into that familiar pattern kitchen, first then living room. Routine. Predictable. That hadn't changed. I stepped out of my car and walked up the driveway, slowly rehearsing something neutral in my head, just enough to get inside without raising suspicion. He opened the door before I even knocked. "What are you doing here?" Mateo didn't step aside. He filled the doorway like he owned it already. I forgot some things I said, keeping my voice even. "Clothes, documents, you can come back later. I'm here now." We held eye contact a second too long. Then he exhaled sharply and stepped back. "Fine. Make it quick." The smell hit me first when I walked in. Coffee, dust, and something else like recently disturbed paper. I moved past him without another word and headed toward the hallway, but I slowed as I passed the living room. Mateo's phone was on the coffee table screen, still lit from a call. "Yeah, I don't want to wait," he was saying, pacing near the window. "If we can close this week, even better." I didn't stop walking, but I listened. "No, she doesn't have a claim. It's clean. I already checked." I kept going, but my chest tightened. I didn't go to my old room. Instead, I turned left toward my father's office. The door was half open. That alone was wrong. My father kept that door shut. Always. I pushed it open slowly. The desk was cleared. Not messy cleared. Too clean. Drawers slightly ajar. Papers missing. And the safe in the corner open. My stomach dropped. I stepped closer, crouching slightly as if the angle would somehow make it less real. The safe door hung loose, its contents stripped. No files. No folders. Just a faint rectangular outline where something had been sitting for years. Looking for something, Mateo's voice cut through the room. I stood up slowly and turned to face him. "The safe," I said. "Why is it open?" He leaned against the door frame, arms crossed. Calm. Too calm. "I already went through everything. Yeah. Dad didn't leave anything important in there." That wasn't true. My father kept records, detailed ones. Financial logs, property documents, insurance papers, things he never trusted anyone else to manage. Not even Mateo. Especially not Mateo. You didn't think to tell me I asked. Mateo shrugged. There was nothing to tell. I studied his face. No hesitation, no guilt. Just that same practiced indifference he used whenever he wanted to shut a conversation down. But something wasn't lining up. Not the empty safe, not the rushed sale, not the key, and definitely not the way he kept watching me, not like a brother, but like someone waiting to see what I knew. I'm going downstairs, I said. To the basement? Yeah. He pushed off the frame immediately. There's nothing down there. I didn't ask. I walked past him before he could block me again. The stairs creaked the same way they always had, each step announcing my descent. I could feel him behind me, not following, but listening. Watching. The basement light flickered on after the second pull of the chain. Concrete floor. Old shelves. Boxes no one had touched in years. But that wasn't what I was looking for. I moved slowly along the wall, running my fingers across the rough surface. Then I saw it. Near the back corner, half hidden behind a warped wooden panel, was a small metal plate. Old. Scratched. And right in the center of it, the same symbol carved into the key. My pulse spiked. I glanced back toward the stairs. Mateo hadn't come down. Not yet. I stepped closer, brushing the dust away with my sleeve. The outline of a lock became visible beneath the grime. Small. Almost invisible unless you knew exactly where to look. My hand tightened around the key. So this was it. Whatever my father had left me, it wasn't meaningless. It was hidden, and Mateo didn't want me to find it. I hesitated for half a second. Not because I doubted it, but because I understood what it meant. If I turned that key, there was no going back to pretending this was just a bad inheritance decision. This was something else. Something planned. Something buried. I slid the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. Behind me, I heard the first step creak. Mateo. The key turned with a dull, stubborn click. For a second, nothing happened. Just the sound of my own breathing, too loud in the quiet basement. Then I felt the panel give barely, and I pulled it open, heart pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. Behind it was a narrow cavity carved directly into the wall, and inside, a metal box. Small, heavy, deliberate. I grabbed it quickly, sliding it out just as another step creaked behind me. Isabella. Mateo's voice was closer now. Too close. I turned halfway, forcing my body to stay loose, casual. Just looking around. His eyes dropped to my hands immediately. You don't need to touch anything down here, he said, starting down the last few steps. I didn't answer. Instead, I brushed past him with the box tucked against my side like it was nothing. Like it didn't matter. But it did. It mattered enough that he followed me all the way up the stairs. What is that? He asked. Old junk, I said lightly. If it's worthless, you won't mind. He didn't laugh. That was how I knew I was right. I didn't stop moving until I reached the front door. I could feel his eyes on my back, calculating, trying to decide whether to push harder or let me go. He chose the second. For now. Don't come back without asking, he said as I opened the door. I didn't turn around. Then maybe don't act like you have something to hide. I stepped outside before he could respond, closing the door behind me with more control than I felt. The moment I reached my car, I locked the doors and sat there gripping the steering wheel. The box rested on the passenger seat. I stared at it for a long time before I touched it again. It wasn't fancy. No markings. Just cold metal with a latch that looked older than the house itself. My father had hidden this. Not in the safe. Not somewhere obvious, somewhere Mateo would never think to look. Or somewhere he hadn't found yet. That thought sent a chill through me, because if Mateo had already emptied the safe, then this box was the one thing he missed, or the one thing he wasn't supposed to find. I drove straight home without turning on the radio. Every red light felt longer than usual. Every car behind me made me check the mirror twice. I didn't fully relax until I was inside my apartment door locked, chain slid into place. Only then did I set the box down on my kitchen table. Up close, I noticed the edges were worn from years of handling. Not frequent use, but intentional use. This wasn't storage. This was insurance. I flipped the latch open. It resisted at first, then gave with a soft snap. Inside were two things: a thick leather-bound notebook and a USB drive. I reached for the notebook first. The pages were filled with my father's handwriting, neat, methodical, unmistakable. Dates, numbers, notes written in the margins, transactions, transfers, account references. I turned a few pages, my eyes scanning faster with each line. Large sums of money moved gradually over time. Not random, structured, careful, and always authorized under his name. Except the dates didn't line up. Some of these transactions were recorded during periods when I knew he was already struggling, when he could barely manage basic tasks, let alone orchestrate complex financial moves. My stomach tightened. Someone had been using his name. Someone close enough to access everything. I didn't need to guess who. Still, I kept reading. There were notes in the margins, short phrases my father had written to himself. Check signature discrepancy. Review access logs. Not aligned with intent. And then on one page underlined twice, do not confront yet. My fingers paused there. He had known. Not everything maybe, but enough to suspect. Enough to start documenting. Enough to prepare. I swallowed hard and set the notebook aside, reaching for the USB. This part felt different. Heavier. More final. I plugged it into my laptop and waited. For a second, nothing happened. Then a folder appeared. One file stood out immediately. A video. Dated 3 months before he died. My hand hovered over the trackpad. I wasn't ready. Not really. Because whatever was in that video, it was going to confirm something I couldn't undo, something that would change the way I saw my family forever. I clicked it anyway. The screen flickered, and then my father appeared, older, tired, sitting in his office chair, the same one Mateo had already cleared out. He looked directly into the camera, like he knew exactly who would be watching. Isabella, he said quietly. I froze. If you're seeing this, it means I was right to trust you. My chest tightened instantly. Behind him, I recognized the shelves. The same room, the same house Mateo now owned. I need you to understand something, he continued. I made a mistake, and I didn't catch it soon enough. My breath slowed. Every word felt deliberate, measured. Money has been leaving our accounts, not all at once, small enough to ignore, smart enough to hide. I leaned closer to the screen. I thought it was external at first, he said. But it's not. A pause. Then, it's someone inside this family. My fingers curled against the edge of the table. He looked down briefly, like the next part cost him something. I don't have proof strong enough yet, he said. But I have enough to know I can't leave things the way they are. My heart was racing now. I've structured everything carefully, he continued. If I'm right, the truth will surface. And when it does, The person responsible won't be able to hide behind paperwork or authority." My throat felt tight. He looked back at the camera. Direct again. Certain. "I didn't leave you the house for a reason." The room felt suddenly smaller. "Because the house isn't the asset." I barely breathed. "The information is." The video cut abruptly. Just like that. No explanation, no name, no final confirmation. Just enough to push everything into place and leave one question hanging. If he knew what was happening, why didn't he stop it? And more importantly, how far had it already gone? I stared at the blank screen, my reflection faintly staring back at me. Then my phone buzzed on the table. A message from Mateo. "Did you take something from the basement I didn't answer?" Another message came seconds later. "You need to bring it back." I picked up the phone, slowly reading it again. Not "what did you take?" Not "did you take anything?" He already knew, or at least suspected enough to be nervous. I looked back at the notebook, at the USB still plugged into my laptop, at everything my father had hidden. Whatever this was, I was already in the middle of it, and Mateo wasn't going to let me walk away quietly. I didn't reply to Mateo. Instead, I turned my phone face down and sat there for a long moment, staring at my father's paused face on the screen. There was something in his expression I hadn't fully registered the first time. Fatigue, yes, but also restraint. Like he had stopped himself from saying more. That meant the rest wasn't in the video. It had to be in the data. I unplugged the USB, then plugged it back in, opening the folder again, with more focus this time. The video wasn't alone. There were several files, spreadsheets, scanned documents, and something labeled access_logs. I opened the spreadsheets first. Rows and rows of transactions filled the screen. Dates, amounts, account numbers, reference codes. It looked overwhelming at first, but this was my field. I worked in financial risk analysis. I spent my days looking for patterns that didn't belong. And this wasn't random. The amounts were spaced out just enough to avoid triggering alerts. Transfers routed through intermediary accounts before landing in a final destination. Clean, quiet, professional. I leaned back slightly, letting my eyes scan instead of chase. Patterns always showed themselves when you stopped forcing them. There. Clusters. Every few months, a slightly larger transfer. Always followed by a period of inactivity. Like someone testing limits then pulling back. My chest tightened. This wasn't desperation. This was strategy. I opened the next file, scanned documents. Bank authorizations. Power of attorney forms. Signature verifications. My father's name was on all of them. But the signatures... I zoomed in. At first glance, they looked identical, but when I compared them to a known sample from earlier documents, the differences were there. Subtle. Stroke pressure slightly off. The angle of the G in Garcia just a fraction tighter. Forged. Carefully. Repeatedly. I swallowed hard. Mateo didn't just take advantage of access. He had recreated it. I clicked into the access_logs file next. This one took longer to process. Timestamps, login credentials, IP addresses. It wasn't organized for readability, it was raw data. But again, patterns. The logins always happened late at night, between 100 and 300 a.m., and always from the same device. I cross-referenced one of the IP addresses with a quick lookup. It traced back to our house. Of course it did. But what mattered more was the frequency. These weren't isolated incidents. They were consistent, controlled. Whoever did this had time access and confidence that no one was watching. I leaned back, rubbing my forehead slowly. The room felt too quiet, too still. My phone buzzed again. I didn't want to check it, but I did anyway. Mateo, you're making this more complicated than it needs to be. A second message followed. Whatever you found, it doesn't change anything. I stared at the words. That wasn't denial. That wasn't confusion. That was positioning. He knew exactly what I might have found, and he was already trying to minimize it. I didn't respond. Instead, I picked up the notebook again. This time, I read it more carefully. Not just the transactions, but the notes. My father had been documenting inconsistencies, cross-checking statements, marking entries that didn't align with his intentions. On one page, he had written access granted too broadly. Correct later. On another, trust misallocated. I paused on that one. Trust misallocated. That wasn't about a system. That was about a person. I flipped forward. The notes became more urgent as the dates got closer to his death. Shorter, more direct. Unusual withdrawal did not authorize. Signature mismatch again. Need external verification. And then near the back, a page that was different. No numbers, no transactions, just a single line written slower than the rest. If I'm right, Isabella will see it. My throat tightened. He had known I would look deeper. He had expected it. I closed the notebook, gently pressing my palm against the cover like I could feel him through it. For a moment, everything else faded. The anger, the confusion, the betrayal. All of it sat behind something quieter. Clarity. This wasn't just about money. This was about control. Mateo hadn't just taken advantage of a situation, he had built one. Over time. Carefully. And my father had realized it too late to stop it directly, so he did the only thing he could. He left a path, a test, and a trigger. I exhaled slowly, then reached for my laptop again. If I was going to move forward, I needed more than suspicion. I needed proof that would hold up legally, clearly, undeniably. The kind of proof Mateo couldn't talk his way out of. I opened a new document and started organizing everything. Transaction clusters, signature discrepancies, access logs. I built a timeline, mapped behavior against my father's health records, noted every inconsistency. By the time I looked up again, it was past midnight. My eyes burned, but my thoughts were sharper than they'd been all day. I had something now. Not everything, but enough to know this wasn't going to end quietly. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't Mateo. Unknown number. I hesitated, then opened it. Ms. Garcia, this is Carlos Mendez. We need to talk. I didn't say everything earlier. I sat up straighter. Carlos. My father's old accountant. The one who barely looked at me when I asked questions at the bank. Why reach out now? Another message came through. There are transactions I was told not to question. I think your father knew. My pulse picked up again. So it wasn't just me seeing it. Someone else had noticed too, but hadn't spoken up. Until now? I stared at the message for a long second before typing back. When can you meet? The reply came almost immediately. Tomorrow. But not at the office. A pause. Then your brother comes by more often than you think. I set the phone down slowly. The room didn't feel quiet anymore. It felt watched. If Mateo had been controlling access, influencing people, then this wasn't just about uncovering the past. It was about navigating something that was still active, still moving. And now, I wasn't the only one who knew, which meant I wasn't the only one at risk. I met Carlos Mendez the next morning at a small coffee shop about 20 minutes away from my father's house. He chose the location, not me. That alone told me something. Carlos had worked with my father for almost 15 years. He was the kind of accountant who kept paper copies of everything, even in an age where most people trusted cloud storage more than filing cabinets. My father used to joke that Carlos could find a receipt from 10 years ago faster than he could find his own phone. But when I sat across from him that morning, he didn't look like the confident man I remembered. He looked tired and nervous. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup. "You said you didn't tell me everything before." Carlos looked down at the table. "I should have." The words came out heavier than I expected. "What happened?" I asked. He took a breath before answering. "Your father started asking questions about money transfers about 8 months before he passed away." I stayed silent. "Not huge transfers," Carlos continued. "That's what made it difficult. Whoever did this understood how financial systems work. They weren't taking millions at once. They were taking enough that each transaction looked explainable." My stomach tightened. The same thing I found I said. Carlos nodded slowly. "Yes. But your father found something I didn't see at first." "What?" He noticed the timing. Carlos pulled a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. I looked at it but didn't touch it yet. "Your father's health was declining," Carlos said. "Everyone knew that. But during the months when he was struggling the most, there were more account activities than ever." I frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "Exactly." He opened the folder and turned it toward me. Inside were printed statements. These withdrawals required authorization. Some were online approvals, some were document-based. But your father physically couldn't have completed all of them. I scanned the pages. The dates matched what I had found. The pattern was clearer now. "Why didn't you report it?" I asked. Carlos looked away. That hesitation told me the answer before he spoke. "Because I was told your father approved everything." "By who?" He didn't answer immediately. Then he said Mateo. Hearing his name still felt strange. Not because I didn't suspect him, because some part of me was still hoping I was wrong. Carlos continued. "Your brother told me your father wanted him to handle certain matters privately because Isabella was too emotional and would worry unnecessarily." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was so familiar. That was Mateo's favorite strategy. He never attacked directly. He made you sound incapable first. Too sensitive. Too inexperienced. Too dramatic. Then he positioned himself as the responsible one. "My father never said that," I whispered. Carlos nodded. "I know that now." He reached into the folder and pulled out another document. "This is why I contacted you. It was a company registration document, a business entity called Northbridge Holdings, LLC. I scanned the information. At first it looked unrelated. Then I saw the registered address. My father's property address. My eyes narrowed. "This company was connected to my family's house," Carlos nodded. "Created 2 years ago." "By who?" He tapped the document. "Your brother." I felt a wave of anger rise, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Why create a company using the house address? That's what your father was trying to figure out." Carlos opened another page. "This company received several transfers from accounts connected to your father." I stared at the numbers. The amounts weren't random. They matched the transfers from my father's notebook. But something bothered me. "Wait," I said. "If Mateo owned this company, why didn't the money go directly to him?" Carlos looked at me carefully. because direct transfers would have been obvious. A cold feeling moved through me. Someone had built layers, accounts, companies, paperwork. A wall of confusion designed to protect one person. I looked back at Carlos. Was my father going to confront him? Carlos sighed. I think he wanted to, but he was afraid of what would happen if he accused Mateo without enough proof. That sounded exactly like my father. He wasn't weak. He was careful. He knew accusations inside a family could destroy relationships forever, especially when there was still a chance he could be wrong. But he wasn't wrong. Not completely. Carlos folded his hands together. There's something else you should know. I waited. Your father asked me to prepare a complete financial review, when 3 weeks before he died. My heart skipped slightly. Did you finish it? Carlos looked uncomfortable. Yes. Where is it? He hesitated. That hesitation bothered me more than anything else. Carlos. He looked directly at me. I gave it to your father, and he told me not to send copies to anyone. Why? Carlos lowered his voice. Because he said there was one person he still wasn't sure he could trust. The coffee shop suddenly felt too quiet. I knew the answer before asking. Mateo Carlos didn't say anything. He didn't need to. I looked down at the documents spread across the table. The key, the hidden box, the notebook, the video. Now this. Every piece was connecting. But there was still one thing I couldn't understand. If my father had enough evidence to know something was wrong, why did he leave the house to Mateo? Why give the person he suspected the very thing that contained the truth? Carlos seemed to read the question on my face. There's one more thing, he said. What your father changed something in his estate plan shortly before he died. I looked up. What did he change? Carlos reached into the folder and pulled out a sealed envelope. I don't know, but your father told me this. He placed it in front of me. He said, when Isabella finds the key, give her this. My fingers hovered over the envelope. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable. My father's. And beneath my name were 5 words that made my heart stop. Open only when you know the truth. I carried the envelope home without opening it. That decision surprised even me. A week earlier, I would have torn into it immediately. I would have needed answers. I would have needed proof that my father had left something behind for me, something Mateo couldn't take away. But after everything I had discovered, I understood something important. Timing mattered. My father hadn't hidden these things because he wanted me to find them quickly. He hid them because he wanted me to find them when I was ready to understand them. And I wasn't ready yet. Not completely. I placed the envelope on my kitchen table beside the notebook and USB drive. Then I spent the next several hours reviewing everything I had collected. The financial records, the access logs, the company documents, Carlos's statements. I built a timeline from the beginning, not the emotional version, the factual one. That was something my career had taught me. Feelings could tell you something was wrong, but evidence was what allowed you to prove it. And right now, I needed proof, not revenge, not anger, proof. By the time I finished, I had a clear picture. Mateo had created Northbridge Holdings, LLC. Money had moved from family accounts into accounts connected to that company. Documents had been signed under my father's name during periods when his health made that questionable, and someone had deliberately kept me away from information. But there was still a problem. Most of what I had was circumstantial. Strong suspicion. A disturbing pattern, but not enough to win a legal fight. I needed to know what my father had changed in his estate plan, and for that I needed to talk to Jonathan Whitmore, the lawyer who smiled when he handed me a rusty key, the man who seemed to know more than he was saying. I called his office the next morning. His assistant recognized my name immediately. "Mr. Whitmore is expecting your call," she said. That sentence bothered me. Expecting. Not surprised. Expecting. I arrived at Whitmore's office 30 minutes later. It was exactly the kind of place I imagined for someone like him. Quiet. Organized. Expensive without trying to look expensive. Dark wooden shelves. Framed certificates. No unnecessary decorations. Everything had a purpose. Including him. "Isabella," he said as I entered. "Please sit." I placed the folder on his desk. "I know about Northbridge Holdings." His expression didn't change. "I know about the transfers." Still nothing, and I know my father suspected someone was using his accounts. Whitmore folded his hands. "Your father was a very careful man. That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." I leaned forward. "Were you helping him investigate Mateo?" For the first time, there was a slight change in his face. Not surprise, more like disappointment. "Your father did not ask me to investigate your brother." "Then what did he ask you to do?" Whitmore looked toward the window for a moment. "He asked me to prepare for possibilities." I frowned. Possibilities? Your father understood that accusations without evidence could destroy a family. He also understood that ignoring warning signs could destroy everything else. I looked away. That sounded exactly like my father, always trying to protect everyone even when they were hurting him. "Why didn't you tell me any of this before I asked?" "Because your father specifically instructed me not to." That answer frustrated me. "He's gone, Mr. Whitmore. He can't protect secrets anymore." Whitmore looked directly at me. "No, but he can still protect you from making the wrong decision." I didn't like how calm he was. How could knowing the truth be the wrong decision because the truth has consequences? I stayed silent. He continued, "Your brother has spent years building a certain image. Responsible son, family provider, the person everyone depends on. That doesn't make him innocent," No Whitmore said. "It doesn't." The agreement in his voice caught me off guard. He wasn't defending Mateo. He was measuring the situation. Then why does the will give him the house I asked? Whitmore reached into a drawer and removed a file. "Because that was only the first layer." My heart started beating faster. He placed the file on the desk but didn't open it. "Your father understood your brother's personality very well." "What does that mean?" "It means your father believed Mateo would reveal himself if he believed he had already won." I stared at him. A cold realization settled in. The house wasn't a gift. It was bait. But I needed him to say it. "Are you telling me my father intentionally gave Mateo control of the house?" Whitmore nodded slowly. "Yes." I sat back, stunned. "Why?" "Because your father believed Mateo would rush." And he did. "Exactly." The lawyer opened the file. Inside were additional estate documents. Not a new will. Something attached to it. A legal instruction. I scanned the first page. My father's name was at the bottom. This was created 3 weeks before his death, Whitmore said. The same time Carlos mentioned. I looked up. "What does it say?" Whitmore paused. Then he answered carefully. "It says that certain assets would remain under your brother's control only temporarily." I turned back to the document. My eyes moved quickly across the page. There was a condition, a requirement, a trigger. And then I saw my name, not as a beneficiary, as the person responsible for proving the truth. I looked at Whitmore. My father made me part of this. He trusted you. I shook my head slightly. No, he put this on me. Whitmore didn't argue. Because he knew there was truth in that. For years, I had been the daughter who stayed quiet, the one who avoided conflict, the one everyone called when they needed help but ignored when decisions were made. And now my father had placed the biggest decision of our family's future in my hands. I closed the file. What happens if I do nothing? Whitmore answered immediately. Your brother keeps everything. And if I prove the fraud... His expression became serious. Then control of the estate changes. I looked down at the rusty key I had placed beside my folder. The same key that started all of this. For the first time, I understood why Whitmore smiled. He wasn't amused. He was relieved. Because the person my father trusted had finally found the door. But before I left, Whitmore stopped me. Isabella. I turned around. There is one thing you need to understand. What your brother is not going to wait for you to finish investigating. I froze. What does that mean? Whitmore looked at the file on his desk. It means he already knows you found something. My phone rang before I could respond. Mateo. I stared at the screen. Then I answered. His voice was calm. Too calm. Isabella, he said. A pause. I think we need to talk about what you're doing with Dad's things. I looked at Whitmore. The lawyer didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The game had already changed. I didn't answer Mateo immediately. For a few seconds, I just listened to the silence between us. It was strange how familiar his silence felt. Growing up, Mateo was always good at making people fill the empty space for him. He rarely raised his voice. He rarely needed to. He knew that if he stayed calm long enough, other people would start explaining themselves, apologizing, or questioning their own instincts. I had spent years mistaking that for maturity. It wasn't maturity, it was control, Isabella Mateo said. Are you there? Yes. I think we need to have a conversation. About what I asked, even though I already knew. A short pause. About the things you took from Dad's house. I looked at Whitmore across the desk. He gave me a small nod. Not encouragement exactly, but confirmation. Be careful. Choose your words. I took my own belongings, I said. You know that's not what I mean. His voice remained calm, almost disappointed. Like I was the one creating a problem. I'm trying to understand what you're looking for, Isabella. I almost smiled. Not because anything was funny, because it was predictable. He wasn't asking because he cared. He was asking because he needed information. I don't think we have anything to discuss right now, I said. Really? His tone changed slightly. Only slightly. I'd hate for this to become something bigger than it needs to be. There it was, the warning hidden inside concern. You mean you'd hate for me to ask questions? I replied. Silence. Then he sighed. You always do this. Do what assume the worst. I looked down at the documents on Whitmore's desk. The irony almost hurt. My entire life, Mateo had been the person everyone believed. The responsible one. The son who stayed close. The one who handled family matters. Meanwhile, I was the daughter who lived 2 hours away, built a career, paid her own bills, and somehow became the person everyone thought was detached. Mateo. I said quietly. You don't get to decide what questions I'm allowed to ask about my own family. Another pause. Then his voice became colder. Be careful, Isabella. The call ended. I stared at the phone. Whitmore waited a moment before speaking. He knows. Yes, and now he knows you're not going to step aside. I placed the phone on the desk. I need to know what my father left in that envelope. Whitmore nodded. That is your decision. Why are you making it sound like there's a risk? Because there is. He pushed the sealed envelope toward me. Your father wanted you to open this only after you understood the situation. I picked it up. The paper felt ordinary. That almost made it worse. Something this important shouldn't look so simple. I took it home that evening. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I made dinner. I cleaned my apartment. I answered emails from work. I did normal things because I needed to remind myself that my life was still mine, that I was not just someone chasing answers left behind by a dying man. I was Isabella Garcia, a financial analyst, a woman who had built a life without depending on anyone's approval. But eventually the envelope was still sitting there, waiting. Around midnight, I finally opened it. Inside was a letter. Not a legal document, not a financial report. A letter from my father. My hands shook slightly as I unfolded it. Dear Isabella. I stopped for a moment. Just seeing my name written by him was enough to bring back memories I wasn't prepared for. His handwriting had always been steady, even near the end. I know you may be confused. You may even feel hurt that I placed this responsibility on you. I swallowed. Because he was right. I want you to understand something. I did not choose you because you were easier to manipulate. I chose you because you were the only person in this family who never needed to control others to feel important. I looked away from the page. That sentence hit harder than I expected. My father continued, For years, I watched your brother struggle with feeling overlooked. I thought success and responsibility would help him overcome that. I believed giving him trust would make him become the man he wanted to be. I paused. This was the part I hadn't considered. Mateo wasn't just someone who woke up one day and decided to hurt people. There was history, pain, insecurity. But none of that erased what he had done. The letter continued. I realize now that I confused giving someone a second chance with giving them unlimited access. I stared at that sentence for a long time, because that was exactly what had happened. My father had wanted to believe in Mateo so badly that he ignored the warning signs, and Mateo had used that belief as protection. The next paragraph changed everything. I created the additional estate instructions because I knew accusations would not be enough. Mateo would deny. He would explain. He would convince others that he was misunderstood. I exhaled slowly. That was exactly what he was already doing. He needs to believe he has won before the truth is revealed. I looked at the page again. The house, the inheritance, the confidence. It had all been part of the design. Then I reached the final paragraph. If you are reading this, it means you found the key. It means you looked closer when others told you not to, and it means you have something your brother has never learned to value. I turned the page. There was one final line. Patience. I sat there quietly, not because I suddenly felt victorious. I didn't. I felt tired, sad, angry. But underneath all of it was something stronger. Direction. The next morning I called Whitmore. I'm ready, I said, for what he asked. To stop investigating like someone who is trying to prove she's right. I looked at the evidence spread across my table and start investigating like someone who needs to prove the truth. Whitmore was silent for a moment. Then he said, Good. Why? Because yesterday your brother believed you were searching for answers. A pause. Today he needs to know you're building a case. After we ended the call, I opened my laptop. I created a new folder, not labeled with Mateo's name, not labeled with revenge, just one word: evidence. I had the key. I had the documents. I had the beginning of the truth. But I still didn't have the one thing that would change everything: the complete financial review my father had ordered before he died, and according to Carlos, someone had it. The first thing I learned about building a legal case was that suspicion moves quickly, but evidence moves carefully. I wanted to confront Mateo. I wanted to put every document in front of him and watch his confidence disappear. I wanted him to finally understand what it felt like to be ignored, underestimated, and treated like my voice didn't matter. But wanting that wasn't the same as doing what was right, and my father's entire plan depended on one thing: patience. So instead of calling Mateo, I called Carlos. "I need the financial review," I said. There was silence on the other end. "I was hoping you wouldn't ask for that yet," he replied. "Why?" "Because once you see it, there's no pretending this is a family disagreement anymore." I sat quietly at my desk, looking at the documents spread around me. "It already isn't," I said. Another pause. Then Carlos sighed. "Come by tomorrow." The next afternoon, I met him at his office. It was a small place above a row of local businesses, nothing like the corporate accounting firms you see downtown. Carlos had always preferred practical things: simple office, simple systems, no unnecessary appearance. The kind of person my father trusted. He locked the door behind me when I entered. That bothered me, not because I thought he was hiding something from me, because it showed how afraid everyone had become. Carlos opened a filing cabinet and removed a thick binder. "I kept a copy because your father asked me to." My heart tightened. "You said you gave it to him." "I did. But before he passed away, he told me to keep my own record." He placed the binder in front of me. "This is everything I found." I opened it. The first pages were exactly what I expected: account summaries, transfer records, authorization documents. But then I reached the section marked discrepancies. That was where everything changed. Carlos had documented every transaction that raised concerns, not opinions, not guesses, facts, dates, amounts, signatures, approval methods. And beside several entries, one name appeared repeatedly: Mateo Garcia. I closed my eyes briefly. Seeing it written down felt different from thinking it privately. Suspicion was emotional. A documented pattern was something else entirely. "Did my father see this?" I asked. Carlos nodded. "He saw everything." "Then why didn't he stop him?" Carlos looked at me carefully. "Because your father still hoped there was an explanation." That hurt more than I expected, because I knew that feeling. I had spent years hoping Mateo was just immature, just insecure, just struggling. It was easier to believe someone was lost than to accept they were choosing their actions. Carlos turned another page. "This is the part you need to understand." I looked down. A list of transfers appeared. These payments weren't used for personal spending. I frowned. "What do you mean?" "They were moved through business accounts." "Northbridge Holdings." "Yes." I kept reading. The money moved from family accounts into the company, then into another account connected to property investments. But one detail caught my attention. "What is this?" I pointed at a series of payments. Carlos leaned closer. "That's why your father was concerned. The payments weren't going to Mateo. They were going to another person, a name I didn't recognize." "Who is Evelyn Hart?" I asked. Carlos looked uncomfortable. "I was hoping you wouldn't have to find out this way." My stomach tightened. "Who is she?" He took a breath. "Mateo's former business partner." I stared at the page. Former. Yes. Then why is family money going to her? Carlos didn't answer immediately, because the answer was clearly not simple. Finally, he said, "That's something your brother would have to explain." I looked through the records again. There was a piece missing. A reason. A motive. And without that, Mateo could still claim everything had a legitimate explanation. But then Carlos handed me one more document. This was attached to the financial review. It was a copy of an email. From Mateo. To my father. My hands went cold as I read it. The email was from 6 months before my father died. The subject line was simple, about the house. The message was short. Mateo wrote that he needed more time to fix the situation, that he had borrowed against future expectations, that he could not afford for anyone to know. I read the sentence twice. Borrowed against future expectations. My father knew. He knew Mateo wasn't just moving money. He knew Mateo was depending on an inheritance that had not yet happened. He was in debt, I whispered. Carlos nodded. Deep debt. I leaned back. Suddenly, everything made sense. The urgency to sell the house. The confidence. The anger when I started asking questions. Mateo wasn't just protecting stolen money. He was protecting a future that depended on controlling that house. But there was still something I couldn't understand. Why did he think he would get away with it? I asked. Carlos looked down. Because he believed your father would protect him. That sentence stayed with me. Because it was probably true. My father had spent his whole life trying to save people from consequences, especially people he loved. I closed the binder slowly. So what happens now? I asked. Carlos looked at me. Now you have enough to stop the sale. I nodded, but before I could answer, my phone started ringing. Mateo. Again. This time I answered. Hello? His voice sounded different. Less patient. You went to see Carlos. I didn't speak. How did you know I asked? A short laugh. You really think you're the only person asking questions? My grip tightened around the phone. What do you want, Mateo? I want you to understand something. His voice lowered. You're looking at things you don't understand. I understand enough. No, Isabella. You don't. There was anger now. Not loud anger. Controlled anger. The house is complicated. Dad's finances were complicated. You're turning this into something it isn't. I looked at the binder on the table. No. I think you're afraid it's exactly what it looks like. Silence. Then Mateo said something I didn't expect. You should ask Whitmore why Dad left you the key. My eyebrows tightened. What does that mean? But he had already ended the call. I stared at the screen, because for the first time Mateo hadn't sounded confident. He sounded worried. And that meant one thing. There was still a piece of the puzzle I hadn't found. Something even Mateo was afraid I would discover. Mateo's words stayed in my mind all night. You should ask Whitmore why Dad left you the key. I replayed the sentence over and over, trying to understand what he meant. Was it a threat? A warning? Or was he trying to make me doubt the very person who had been helping me? That was Mateo's strength. He knew how to create uncertainty. He didn't need to prove something was false. He only needed to make you question whether it was true. And for a few minutes I let him. I looked at the evidence on my table. The documents, the financial review, the email, the timeline. Everything pointed in one direction, but I had learned something from my father's mistakes. Believing something because you wanted it to be true was dangerous. So the next morning I went back to Whitmore's office. This time I didn't arrive looking for answers. I arrived looking for the missing piece. He knew why I was there the moment I walked in. "You spoke with Mateo," he said. I stopped. "How did you know?" Whitmore gave a small, tired smile. "Because your brother has a predictable pattern." I sat down. He told me to ask why my father left me the key. Whitmore was quiet. Too quiet. Why I asked. He opened a drawer and removed a file. "I was hoping you would discover this on your own." That sentence immediately frustrated me. Everyone keeps saying that. My father, Carlos, you. I looked at him directly. But I'm the one dealing with the consequences. Whitmore didn't argue. Instead, he placed the file in front of me. "You're right. That surprised me. I should have told you more sooner." I opened the file. Inside was a document titled Estate Access Agreement. I scanned the first page, then the second, and slowly, I understood. The key wasn't connected to a hidden fortune. It wasn't a secret account. It wasn't some dramatic inheritance. It was something much more important. Control. My father had placed certain documents and records in a private storage unit connected to the key, a place Mateo did not know existed. "Why hide it there?" I asked. Whitmore looked at me. "Because your father knew the house was the first place Mateo would search." I felt my stomach tighten. He knew. Yes. How long? Whitmore took a breath. Long enough to understand that protecting information was more important than protecting possessions. That sentence stayed with me because it changed how I saw everything. My father hadn't been trying to punish Mateo. He had been trying to create a situation where the truth could survive even if he wasn't there to defend it. "When can we access the storage unit?" I asked. "Today." 2 hours later, I stood outside a private storage facility on the edge of Chicago. It wasn't impressive. No dramatic security system, no hidden entrance, just rows of metal doors and ordinary people storing ordinary things. That almost made it feel more real. Whitmore handed me the key. The same rusty key that had started everything. I inserted it into the lock. This time I wasn't nervous. I was ready. Inside was a small storage compartment, a few boxes, a filing container, and one sealed envelope. My name was written on it. Again, Isabella Garcia. I opened it carefully. Inside were copies of documents I had never seen before. Property records, account information, and a letter from my father. I read it silently. "Isabella, if you found this, you already understand that the house was never the real inheritance." I paused. The same idea from the video. The house was never the asset. The greatest mistake I made was believing love alone could correct someone's choices. It cannot. My eyes moved slower. I loved Mateo. I still do, but love without boundaries becomes permission. I closed my eyes for a moment, because that was the lesson my father had learned too late. The next pages contained something even more important. A complete record of the ownership structure behind Northbridge Holdings. Not just Mateo's connection, everyone involved, including Evelyn Hart. But the final page was what changed everything. A signed statement from Mateo himself, years earlier. A statement acknowledging that certain family funds were being used temporarily for business purposes. Temporarily. But the money had never been returned. And beneath that statement was a signature. Mateo's signature. Real. Not copied, not questioned. His own. I stared at it. This was the evidence we needed. The kind that couldn't be explained away as misunderstanding. The kind that showed intent. Whitmore watched my expression carefully. You understand now? I nodded slowly. The key wasn't opening a place. No, it was opening a timeline. For the first time since this started, Whitmore smiled. Not because he was happy, because my father's plan had worked. But before we could leave, my phone rang. It was Carlos. I answered immediately. Isabella, you need to come to the house. His voice sounded urgent. What happened? Mateo was there. I stood still. Why? A pause. Then Carlos said the words that made my entire body tense. He's signing the sale agreement today. I looked at the documents in my hand, the proof, the evidence. Everything my father had hidden for this exact moment. But if Mateo completed the sale before we stopped him, it could all become much harder. I looked at Whitmore. He already understood. Let's go, he said. And for the first time, I wasn't walking into my family's house as the daughter who had been left out. I was walking in as the person who finally knew the truth. By the time we reached my father's house, I could already see the difference. There were 2 cars parked in the driveway. One belonged to Mateo. The other belonged to the real estate agent. For a moment, I just sat there looking at the house where I had spent my childhood. The place where my father taught me how to fix broken things. The place where Mateo learned that if he acted confident enough, people would often stop questioning him. But this time was different. I wasn't coming back as the younger sister who needed permission to speak. I wasn't coming back as the daughter everyone expected to stay quiet. I was coming back with facts. Whitmore parked beside the driveway and looked at me. Are you ready? He asked. I took a breath. No. He nodded slightly. That's usually how people feel before doing something difficult. I almost smiled. Then we walked inside. The living room had been rearranged. Boxes sat near the walls. Documents covered the dining table. Mateo stood near the window with a pen in his hand. When he saw me, his expression changed immediately. Not panic, not fear, something more complicated. Recognition. He knew the moment had arrived. I knew you'd come here eventually, he said. I looked at the papers on the table. You were about to sell the house. Mateo glanced at Whitmore. You brought him. I brought the person who understands the legal documents you signed. His jaw tightened. The agent looked uncomfortable. I think we should pause until everyone understands what's happening, she said. Mateo ignored her. This is ridiculous, Isabella. There it was again. The same tone. The same strategy. Make me feel unreasonable. Make the situation look emotional instead of factual. You're creating a problem where there isn't one. I placed the folder on the table. No, I'm showing the problem that already existed. I opened the first document. Northbridge Holdings. His expression changed slightly. Then I placed the financial review beside it. The transfers. Silence. Then the authorization records. The signatures. Mateo looked at Whitmore. This is private family information. Whitmore answered calmly. No, this is estate-related evidence involving financial misconduct. Mateo's face hardened. You're accusing me. I looked at him. No. I paused. I'm presenting what happened. That seemed to bother him more, because accusations could be denied. Facts were harder. He walked toward the table and picked up the documents. "You don't understand what you're looking at. I understand enough." "No, you don't." His voice rose slightly. This wasn't theft. The room went quiet. It was the first time he had admitted anything close to involvement. "What was it then?" I asked. He looked away. I was trying to fix things. And there it was. Not innocence, not denial. An explanation. Mateo sat down heavily. For the first time, he looked less like the confident older brother everyone admired and more like the exhausted man underneath it all. "I made mistakes," he said. I listened. Because I needed to hear this. Not because it changed what he did, but because I needed to understand why. He explained that years earlier, his business had started failing. He had borrowed money expecting a future deal to work out. When it didn't, he started moving family funds temporarily, believing he could replace everything before anyone noticed. But temporary became permanent. One decision became another, and eventually he wasn't trying to solve the problem anymore. He was trying to hide it. "I thought Dad would help me," Mateo said quietly. I looked at him. "That's the part you still don't understand." He looked up. "Dad did help you." I pointed at the documents. "He gave you chances. He trusted you. He protected you." My voice stayed calm. "But you confused protection with permission." Mateo looked down. For once, he had no answer. The sale was stopped that afternoon. The legal process took months after that. There were investigations, financial reviews, meetings, and paperwork. It wasn't dramatic like movies make it seem. Justice rarely happens in one perfect moment. It happens through documents, through patience, through people doing their jobs correctly. Eventually, the court confirmed the financial misconduct. Mateo lost control of the assets he had tried to manipulate, and he was required to repay the money connected to the misuse of family funds. The house did not become my trophy. That surprised some people. They expected me to keep it just to prove I had won, but I didn't want a building to represent the worst chapter of my life. I sold the house months later. Before the sale was completed, I walked through every room one last time. I stood in my father's office, the room where everything had started, the room where he had hidden the truth. And I realized something. The rusty key was never valuable because of what it opened. It was valuable because of what it represented. My father had spent years believing that keeping peace meant avoiding conflict. But peace without honesty is only silence. And silence can protect the wrong person. I still loved my father. I still cared about Mateo, but I finally understood something important. Boundaries are not punishments. They are the lines we draw when love alone is no longer enough to keep us safe. Life has a strange way of teaching us that family relationships are not always protected by love alone. Sometimes the people closest to us can make choices that hurt us deeply. And when that happens, we have to remember that seeking the truth is not the same as seeking revenge. Isabella did not win because she destroyed her brother. She found peace because she stopped allowing guilt, loyalty, and family expectations to silence her judgment. Setting boundaries with someone we love can be one of the hardest things we ever do. Forgiveness does not mean giving someone unlimited access to hurt us again. It means releasing the weight of anger while still protecting our own future. If you have ever experienced a situation where you had to choose between keeping family peace and protecting yourself, share your thoughts in the comments. Your story may help someone else feel less alone. And if you enjoy fictional stories about family betrayal, justice, boundaries, and healing, consider subscribing for more stories like this. This story is fictional and created for entertainment, education, and reflection.